Alright guys, Murphs here, and today I want to talk about this, a CZ P10c chambered in 9mm. This is our latest episode in Friendly Fire. Friendly Fire is the series that I've started on the channel where I review guns out of my friends' collections. Guns that I have not invested my own money and their time and therefore interest in to establish whether or not I would buy them. All right, so with that, why don't we go ahead and get into a little bit of background. I don't want to refer to it as history because this is not a terribly historic firearm. CZ has long been renowned for bringing in interesting diversity into the market. They have had a long-term successful line of hammer-fired guns, starting off with steel-framed and then following the trend of the market into alloy-framed and eventually polymer-framed hammer-fired guns. However, they would eventually, just like the rest of the market, make the plunge into polymer-framed striker-fired pistols. Now, I've covered a couple of CZs previously on the channel, and I'll throw the links in the description to those videos, but CZ is kind of a conundrum to me. There's an interest in the market for their products. They have well-made guns with interesting features and interesting capabilities. However, they don't do the best job of getting them into the United States, and I cannot decide what the problem is. Now, guys, if you've heard me go on this rant before, go ahead and skip ahead somewhere in the video for some stuff that you actually want to watch. For the rest of you, I'm not sure if it's an issue of getting guns out of the Czech Republic or if it's getting those guns into the United States, but CZ consistently does not have enough product to go around for the interest in the firearms, which is very unfortunate because I really feel like that's negatively impacting their sales in about the worst way possible, because this is a company, that I would actually like to see do rather well. Specifically, if you're in the situation where you're out, wanting to get a new handgun or wanting to get your one and only concealed carry option or a fighting rifle or something along those lines, and you're interested in a CZ product, you might have trouble finding them available or available for a price that you're willing to spend, whatever it is that constitutes a deal to you. So with that being the case, a lot of those people wind up going and buying something else. And that's a huge issue for anybody who's providing a product. There is no time like the present when it comes to sales. If you have somebody who has an interest, it is your duty to get that product into their hands so that they give you their money and not their money to somebody else. Especially in the firearms market, because if somebody goes and let's say that they wanted a P10c, but they couldn't find one, so instead they bought a Glock 19 up until a P10c became available, by the time a P10c becomes available, they will have invested time, ammunition, aftermarket accessories. Money is what it all comes down to. They have invested money and energy into their new gun, which now they become rather comfortable with. And they might be in a situation where they don't want to go and drop the cash on the CZ that they previously would have prior to buying a suitable substitute. Now, of course, it could go the other direction. Someone could say, oh, finally I can get rid of this Glock 19 and I can finally go get that CZ that I want. But you're dealing with probabilities at this point. The first time when they were ready to purchase was the time to strike, not wait for the possibility of a second chance. And this consistently seems to be the problem with CZ in the market, and it really kind of makes me sad because I would like to see more of these products available. I've been trying to track down a CZ Bren for quite some time. Now, I see them available online. I don't always see them available for prices that I actually want to spend. I would love to put my hands on one in the store and finally bring a CZ Bren home at some point, but I've seen very few in person. The only ones that I've seen in person have been in the hands of their owners. Right now, getting back on subject, in 2017, this handgun would hit the market and would immediately pick up the title of Glock 19 Killer. Now, honestly, guys, over the years, quite a few products out on the market have held that title. But CZ took a little bit of an interesting twist on this, in which they actually made it so that it would be compatible with some Glock 19 holsters, or at least that was the data point. Now, one of the biggest things that the Glock company holds over every other polymer frame striker fired manufacturer is that they have a thriving aftermarket. If there's a product that you want, holster, magazine option, whatever, you can find it for a Glock. And that's not necessarily the case for competitive options in the market, which can really impact the adoption from organizations, law enforcement agencies, and all that kind of stuff, let alone the individual purchaser. By being able to tap into some of Glock's market, this made the CZ P10c very competitive. So this drove up a lot of interest and caused a lot of comparisons between this and the Glock 19. tons of videos exist on this particular subject. We're not necessarily going to dive into that too deeply on this particular handgun as much as evaluate it on its own qualities by itself, with a couple of throwbacks to some other handguns as we go through the discussion. Now, I would not say that the CZ P10c necessarily took the market by storm. However, it has been a consistent offering and well thought of by the vast majority of people who've handled one. Since then, they have come out with a subcompact and a full-size model, as well as optics-ready variants. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers background. Why don't we go ahead and start hopping into features. Now, here we have a 3.9-inch barrel, which is right up there with the Glock 19 in comparable length. This is a solid Glock 19 contender when we're talking about overall size, compact design, and all that kind of stuff. Now, one of the talking points about the CZ P10c was that it has a fully supported chamber, which is not necessarily so in a lot of other offerings on the market, Glock and some other in the striker-fired kind of arena. However, I also don't think it's a terribly applicable talking point to the vast majority of the market. A supported chamber is fantastic if you're running high pressure ammunition that could come from together in the chamber. Having a fully supported chamber at that point is very important. However, even in Glocks, which do not have fully supported chambers, you might get a little bit of bulge, but you're not necessarily blowing up the guns unless you're exceeding the pressure capability of the cartridge, which is going to happen regardless of whether or not you have a fully supported chamber. Now, the bigger issue comes into is that Glock bulge that you run into with the unsupported chamber. This is kind of a source of frustration for those who hand load. So if you don't hand load, a fully supported chamber probably isn't that big of a selling point to you. And since the vast majority of the shooting public doesn't hand load, I don't think the supported chamber is really the talking point that a lot of people have made it out to be. Personal opinion there. All right, now, our iron sights are steel 3-dot photoluminescent sights. Now, I've talked about photoluminescent sights before in previous videos. Photoluminescent sights are a paint that is placed over top of your iron sights that are charged by light and then glow in the dark. This is coming out on pretty much everything that's coming out of Europe right now. I think there's something to do with European restrictions on tritium or something along those lines. Not entirely sure, don't really care either. I am not the biggest fan of photoluminescent sights, and that is entirely because they have a shelf life. So, when my CZ P10c, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description, was my bedside gun, I would go to bed with the soft glow of green coming off of my night sights in the dark, lulling me into a sense of safety. And then when I would wake up in the morning, they would be dead. Now, keep in mind, guys, I wake up somewhere between 4 and 5 in the morning. That's pretty early. And those sights are dead by that time, which means at some point in the darkest hours of the night, I don't have night sights. So if something goes bump, I'm either going to come up on no night sights, or I'm going to have to charge them really quickly with my bedside flashlight. Now, that could potentially negatively impact your overall tactical situation. You know what doesn't have that happen? Actual tritium night sights. Those are a plug-and-play option. You pick them up, and as long as 8 to 10 years hasn't passed and they've expired, they're good to go. So that is why I am not a fan of photoluminescent sights, and that is why my current bedside gun has tritium. All right, now one thing that I will say for these sights, though, in addition to being steel, which already puts them well ahead of Glock, but you also have a slight shelf here on the rear sight, which makes it kind of handy if you need to rack it off of like your boot or a belt or something along those lines. It's not the best shelf for that type of application, but it's better than a lot of other offerings out of the market stock on the gun. So I do appreciate that little attention to detail. Now, real quick, why don't we go ahead and talk about slide height real fast here. CZs are generally renowned for having exceedingly low slides, which generally has them attributed to having a very low bore axis. We've discussed that in other videos, and I don't necessarily want to get into that on this one. But I do want to point out that if I put these slides, this being the comparison gun here being the CZ P10c previously mentioned, if I put these up against each other, we see that the CZ P10c has a much more narrow slide than the P10c. This is a departure. The CZ P10c is more indicative of the norm for pretty much all of CZ's handguns. This gun is a pretty drastic departure from that in being a little bit taller in the slide height. Now, does that make this gun super flippy and all that kind of stuff. Not really, and we'll talk about that more once we get into shooting. It's just something that is notable. Now, something else to kind of go with that, first off, our takedown is very similar to that of a Glock, especially once you remove the magazine. But we got the little pull-down tabs, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, something else to discuss here is that generally CZ products, and then their handguns specifically, have excellent full-length guide rails. But that is primarily in the steel-framed guns. In the polymer-framed guns, you have much shorter sections of guide rail, but they are much longer than other comparable polymer-framed, striker-fired handguns out on the market. And that is something that I really appreciate about CZ. Having more guide rail means more contact surface with the slide, allowing for better control of recoil, as well as more reliable lockup for better accuracy. Now, in my opinion, in handguns, accuracy is not that big of a talking point, but I do appreciate little things that help contribute out, little passive means in order to help you better control the gun, manage recoil, and be able to place those hits where it is that you want them. All right, now you'll note that we do have forward cocking serrations. Forward cocking serrations are kind of a hot button topic right now in the market. A lot of people complain that they're added cost, and since they don't use them, they don't want the cost added. They would just as soon have them omitted. However, I would note that some people do use front cocking serrations. I use front cocking serrations whenever I have them available in order to conduct press checks. And if you don't do that type of thing, if you don't rack off the front of your slide and all that kind of stuff, you don't have to. So there's that. All right, now coming off of that, let's go ahead and talk about the loaded chamber indicator. This handgun does have a loaded chamber indicator attached to the extractor right here in the same manner that you would find on a Glock. However, just like on a Glock, I do not consider this tactile. It is a very small bump. It would be very easy to get confused with literally anything else on the slide of this gun. I do not consider extensions of the extractors to be good loaded chamber indicators. They are visual, they are not tactile. So for me, I would still conduct a press check. Now, of course, press checks are a very controversial subject as well. Most people consider them to basically be douchey. They don't want to be considered douches because they're out there doing cool guy press checks and all that kind of stuff. However, in my opinion, what it really comes down to is you don't ever want to run into a condition where you don't have a round in the chamber. So regardless of how it is that you achieve that, press checks, loaded chamber indicators, whatever, I don't care. Do whatever it is that you have to do in order to be able to ensure that your gun is loaded when you need it. I've done it and I've seen tons of other people do it. You step up onto the line at a course for a course of fire, or you are at a competition or something like that, and you step up to the line and you draw your gun and then you get a click no bang because there was not a round in the chamber. Taking the 2 seconds to either conduct a press check or run your finger down the loaded chamber indicator, however it is that you want to do it, whatever it is that you have to do, make sure there's a round in your chamber. That's the end state. That's what matters at the end of the day. Sitting there and saying, well, I know I loaded my gun, is not good enough, because everyone who stepped up on the line ready to shoot that course of fire thought they loaded their gun. It's okay to check. There's nothing wrong with checking. Anyway, back onto the subject here. So let's see here. I think that pretty much covers the slide. So why don't we go ahead and start talking about the frame itself. So we have a Picatinny rail on the dust cover here, which the owner has a TLR7 from Streamlight mounted on this. Now, guys, I've got to say, honestly, I'm not a very big fan of this light. Now, I do like that it's small and compact and has 500 lumens of output. That's pretty good. What I don't care for are the buttons. You have these very low profile pressure pads on here, which I would prefer more of a lever type setup that is a little bit more ambidextrous and easier to kind of tip with the hand or something like that. Where here, I kind of have to not only break my grip, but also kind of press, and I don't care for that personally. It's a personal preference type thing, but yeah, this is not my most favorite light setup that I've ever seen. Right now, our trigger guard is squared off. It's also textured on the front if you're somebody who still grips the front of the trigger guard and doesn't run lights. You'll note that our trigger guard is kind of oversized, which makes it better able to fit a gloved hand. Now, our trigger is absolutely excellent. From the manufacturer, this states that this is a 4.5 to 5 pound trigger, and I 100% believe that, unlike some other manufacturers who claim that they've got reasonable combat triggers in theirs, but they feel much heavier. It has a fairly straight shape to it, which I also like. And when it comes to take up, so I have a little bit of squish up against a very solid wall, a very light, crisp break, and a very short reset. I've got to be completely honest, guys. I really like this trigger. So we can see there, take up, I'm on the wall, good crisp snap, very short reset. Absolutely love this trigger. Very impressed. I would not consider this quite as good as that of like a Walther PPQ or probably on their new PDP. But this would be a solid second place contender in the striker fired market. Absolutely fantastic. All right, now safety wise, we haven't necessarily talked about this on other previous striker fired handgun videos, but we are going to talk about this here today. We do have the kind of trigger safety dingus set into the face of the trigger shoe, which pretty much means that if you do not pull directly on that dingus, you are unable to pull the trigger. Some people get really stressed out about not having a physical manual safety. However, revolvers, for the most part, have not been produced with safeties, and no one really seems to have an issue with that. So it's the same kind of deal with this handgun here. Generally, revolvers are considered to be pretty safe carry options. So same kind of thing. As far as, your trigger is immobilized unless you're properly engaging it. The only time you should be properly engaging that trigger is because you had decided to take that shot against that threat. Because safe shooting practices don't go away just because of the arrangement of your safety. All right, now our magazine release on this handgun is ambidextrous. You can release the magazine from either side. It's located at the heel of the trigger guard itself and kind of the American location. Now, guns not produced in the Czech Republic, guns produced in America will have a reversible safety, which is what most American shooters are already pretty used to begin with. I really like that this is ambidextrous. There are very few handguns out of the market who are doing ambidextrous options. The IWI Masada is doing that, and the old Ruger P series, and I think the SR series as well, had ambidextrous magazine releases. That is how rare it is to see an American-style ambidextrous magazine release. That's not going into the weird HK or Walther method. All right, let's go ahead and talk about this slide release. Now, is it a slide release or is it a slide catch? I don't really care about that argument. I saw a video the other day where a guy's like, well, it all depends on where the serration is. If it's on top, then it's supposed to be a slide release. And if it's on the bottom, then it's supposed to be a slide catch. In my opinion, this should be able to operate as either. And then the shooter makes their decision from there as to how it is that they're going to use it. So I overhand rack my slides coming off of reloads, and I do so not because of an outdated methodology of gross motor movements are the only thing that matter in combat or anything like that. I do it because it works with everything, and I train with a wide variety of handguns. Now, as far as slide releases are concerned on this particular handgun, this is another place where we have a massive departure from previous CZ products. If we look at the CZ P10c, the slide release is set very far forward to where it's very difficult to be able to reach with your firing from your firing grip. That is not the case on the CZ P10c, and I really appreciate that, because if I was somebody who ran slide releases as part of my reload, that would be one of the things that I would want accessible from my firing grip. So CZ did an absolutely fantastic job on this. It is ambidextrous and a little stiff. It is a little stiff. That has been a consistent complaint with the CZ P10c, but it's spacious and it's very easy to get a hold of and be able to do what it is that you need to do. So I don't think it's necessarily inhibiting as much as it just might be something you have to strain against a little bit. Maybe a loaded magazine would make it perform a little bit differently. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about this grip. CZ has always been renowned for fantastic grips, great contours, good grip panels, all that kind of stuff. Just something that really takes on the form of your hand in a very ergonomic and comfortable way. That is not as prevalent on the polymer frame pistols. However, they are still comfortable. As you can see here, we have this excellent high cut underneath the trigger guard. We have a very high grip on the back of the pistol, and it really allows this thing to settle deep into our grip and get into that recoil management and all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that more once we get into shooting. Now, grip texturing, as far as that is concerned, this has excellent checkering on the back straps, front straps, sides, and all that kind of stuff. However, I have one complaint that I leverage against the vast majority of handguns out of the market, and that is that the texturing does not go up higher. The vast majority of my gripping comes from these upper fingers, which don't have as much texturing to hang on to as the lower fingers will. But I have a tendency to shank my grip a little bit whenever it is that I tighten these fingers, so I try to keep them loose as much as I can. Now, we do have replaceable back straps, which is of course a requirement on pretty much any striker fired handgun that's coming out right now. You'd be behind the curve if you didn't have that. Our magazines are 15 round magazines. This will work with CZ P10c magazines, which means that it will also work with CZ P09 magazines, which means you can get 19 round magazines in this if you would like. Now, the magazine well, I have not had a lot of issue with being able to hit, which has been kind of a surprise. I a lot of times have a complaint for that with like Glocks and stuff like that. And this is not in any way beveled or funneled in any way in order to help me out with my magazine changes. Now, something that I have kind of noticed in about the last day or two is that I index my magazine changes in a very similar way to I do with a Glock whenever I'm reloading one. So I think I might have just kind of slipped into an already natural habit for me when it comes to magazine changes on handguns like this. All right, guys, that's features. How does it shoot? Amazingly. I really enjoy shooting this handgun. So being able to get a nice high grip on this pistol, even though it's sitting up a little bit taller than your average CZ P anything, average CZ anything, 75 SPO, 1 Phantom, whatever it is that it might be, this handgun still recoils very flat, and those sights come right back on target very quickly, very easily. It's very easy to manage the recoil. That's not to say that 9mm is a heavily recoiling cartridge, as much as it is to say that if you have a flippy 9mm, it's still going to be more difficult to keep it on target. This handgun is very easy to keep on target. Combine that with a really nice trigger and all that kind of stuff, and this thing is performing quite well. Like this handgun really kind of takes on a life of its own whenever it is that you get into the shooting dynamic with it, and I could easily understand how someone would really like this, because kind of bottom line up front, I really like this. This is a nice gun. This is a good shooting gun for sure. Now, I did have a couple of malfunctions out of it, and I think a couple of things might have been going on. One, I might have been writing the slide release because most of them were failures to lock on the last round. And I do think that I ran some ammunition out of this that I did not particularly care for. I had some remanufactured stuff lying around that I decided to get rid of, and this had a couple of odd malfunctions on it. Some of them possibly shooter induced, but I don't think all of them. All right, guys, so that's shooting. What are my recommendations when it comes to this handgun? Would I recommend this for concealed carry? Conditionally. And really, this conversation winds up being the same one that we had with the Glock 19 Gen 5, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. Would I recommend this for concealed carry? Well, it depends. What time of year is it and where do you live? In winter or something like that, in a lot of places, this would be a fantastic concealed carry option because you have layers to be able to work around. However, if you're living in a warmer environment where you might be wearing lighter layers, this could be more difficult for you to conceal. Depends on your body type and depends on how it is that you dress. Now, whenever it comes to concealment, I get dressed and then I pick a handgun out of my collection that conceals well with how it is that I am dressed. That's because I have a lot of different handguns. If you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of different handguns, you might have to be more cognizant of how it is that you dress if you're going to conceal carry, which potentially becomes bars to you concealed carrying. Oh man, I'm going to change up the outfit and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to wear that, or it's not applicable to where it is that I'm going right now. Screw it, I'll just not carry the gun. That's not a good outcome there. And that's one of the important things to keep in mind whenever you're carrying a large gun, or you meet somebody who says that they consistently carry a large gun. They probably don't. They probably wind up leaving it at home or in the truck quite frequently. So take that stuff with a grain of salt. Smaller guns are easier to conceal for a reason. And the most important thing about concealment is having a gun. All right, so would I, getting back to the point here, would I recommend it for concealed carry? Potentially. What about duty use? Well, when it comes to duty use, I prefer a little bit larger gun, honestly. I'm wearing a full-time duty belt, a dedicated duty belt. I can have higher capacity magazines on it and not worry about it weighing me down. I can have a larger, heavier handgun on it that's easier to fight with because it's easier to shoot, which means that I can, again, I have a belt that's going to be able to take that weight and all that kind of stuff. It's not going to be a big deal to me at the end of the day. However, this would work in a duty type setting. I don't think it would hold anyone back as much as to say that if I was looking for the ideal duty gun, I wouldn't necessarily be looking at a compact gun, depending on what my duties were as well. Scope of duty definitely plays into the conversation at that point. Well, what about a bedside gun? Well, I mean, yeah, obviously we got a light rail and all that kind of stuff. We've got night sights to begin with, so we could use this as a home defense gun if we wanted to, and we could do it quite well with that. All right, what about a competition gun? Well, honestly, if you're concealed carrying or using this as a duty gun, this would make perfect sense to me to compete with as a competition gun. I think it would do quite well in that category. I do think larger guns would do better, more competition-minded designs would do better, but this gun would perform adequately in the competition circuit. So ultimately what I'm saying here is that this gun is a jack of all trades. However, every time you have a jack of all trades, you must remember that they are a master of none. And that's one of the key things here. This gun could fit into a lot of different options. It could fit into a lot of different roles, but it's not necessarily going to fit into every role without needing some considerations taken. So this is the kind of gun that you could wake up in the morning, you could take it off your bedside table, put it into your concealed carry holster, go into work. And let's say that you did some sort of firearms related work for a living. You could get to your locker, pull this out of your concealed carry holster, put it into your duty holster, carry it for your entire shift. Come back off your shift, throw this thing back into your concealed carry holster, go home, put it on your bedside table, and go to sleep. You could do all of that with just this gun, as long as you take certain things into consideration while you do it. All right, now, real question here is, would I buy it? It depends. Would I buy it right now? No. I have plenty of guns that already fill this category that I'm quite happy with, that I've already purchased holsters and magazines and all that kind of stuff and train and carry consistently right now. But let's change the conditions a little bit. Let's say that I sold off my entire collection tomorrow. Big old fat chunk of change, and I'm ready to start all over again and start making decisions based off of my newfound data, things that I've learned over the past couple of years and my entire shooting experience, and I'm gonna go a whole new direction with all my guns, maybe fewer guns this time around. Would I buy this? I would consider it. I would consider it quite heavily, because this thing does just come alive in your hands, and it's really fantastic how well it performs. However, the one thing that's going to hold this gun back compared to a Glock 19 or an MP9C is going to be its aftermarket support. CZ is the only one producing magazines for this handgun, so you are stuck to whatever it is that CZ is importing at the time. And when I previously tried to pick up new magazines for this handgun here, I ran into an issue with CZ product support. I was having a lot of issue tracking down magazines, and I was definitely having an issue tracking down magazines for MSRP, which means that I was potentially looking at paying more than MSRP for the mags because of availability. Holsters. This has more holster options available for it than perhaps some other products out of the market, but it doesn't have as many as if I went with other products. That is something to take into consideration when it comes to options and stuff like that. Especially once you start adding lights and all those types of things, it's really going to shrink your holster options. That's something that you have to be cognizant of. Now, of course, if I bought this, let's say I decided, like, you know what, it really does perform that well. It is a great shooting handgun, and I really, really think that I could do a lot with it in my day-to-day use. I would feel very confident carrying this, and I would feel very confident carrying this. I would spend a lot of time in forums looking up options for holsters, and I would actually probably really take a closer look at lights, at Glock 19 style holsters that do their lockup off of whatever light it is that's attached to it, and then make my decisions that way off of the holster. Probably a really good way to ensure that the pistol itself will fit in the holster and that I'll have reliable lockup and retention. Because I think for me, the category this would fall into would be kind of low profile duty type use. Somebody who's in a plain clothes type situation who can sustain a little bit larger handgun, but might also still need to do duty type things like have a light and all that kind of stuff. So be able to identify targets and all that type of thing. That's where I kind of see this handgun as having a really good niche there. Now, what else would I change about this handgun? Well, I would swap out the light, go with like a Streamlight TLR1 or a Surefire 300. And then I would also swap out these sights for tritium sights, which manufacturers do make tritium for this handgun. And I would definitely prefer to swap that out. And it would be on my, it wouldn't be on my short list, but it'd be a high priority upgrade to this handgun. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.